It was the crying that was breaking me, not in a sympathetic way, God no. It was like listening to a fire alarm that only I could hear, a high-pitched, relentless drill boring directly into my skull. Lucinda was clinging to my arm, her face a mess of tears and mascara, her words a tangled knot of pleas and accusations. "You can't just leave," she sobbed, her nails digging into my jacket. "You don't understand, it's not safe out there. It's all sharp edges and bad people. I keep you safe. I'm the only one who knows how." I just stood there nodding, my own words trapped in my throat. Her apartment felt like it was shrinking, the air thick with the scent of old incense and her cloying perfume. Every surface was covered in her stuff. Stacks of weird books, strange little charms made of twigs and twine, charts of star alignments taped to the walls. For 2 years, I'd told myself it was quirky, bohemian. Tonight, it just felt like the den of a spider. I wasn't breaking up with a person, I was clawing my way out of a web. "I have to go, Lucy," I finally managed, prying her fingers off my arm. The feeling of her skin leaving mine was like pulling off a leech. "No," her voice cracked. She stumbled in front of the door, blocking my path. "Please, just one more night. We can talk in the morning. Things will be clearer in the morning." But they wouldn't be, they never were. Morning would just bring more of this emotional static, more reasons why I was the bad guy, why I was too broken to survive without her. I sidestepped her, my hand fumbling for the doorknob, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I got the door open and practically fell into the hallway, jabbing the elevator call button like my life depended on it. The ding of its arrival was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I scrambled inside, turning to face her one last time. She stood in her doorway, no longer crying. Her face was strangely blank, her eyes dark and unreadable. The tears were gone, as if they'd been a performance she'd just decided to end. The doors began to slide shut, a slow gray curtain falling on the worst chapter of my life. And in that final inch-wide gap just before the seal was complete, I heard her voice. It wasn't a shout, not even a normal speaking voice. It was a low, calm whisper, a promise laced with something cold and sharp. "I'll give you a 2-hour head start." The elevator doors closed, and the silence was deafening. For a moment I just stood there, my back pressed against the cool metal wall, the echo of her words ringing in my ears. A 2-hour head start. What the hell was that supposed to mean? The absurdity of it was the first thing that hit me. It was a line from a bad action movie, not something you say to your boyfriend who's just dumped you. I burst out of the building and into the humid night air of the city. The roar of traffic, the blare of a distant siren, the chatter of people spilling out of a nearby bar. It was a symphony of normalcy, and I drank it in. Freedom, it tasted like exhaust fumes and relief. I flagged down a taxi, the yellow car a beacon of escape. "Where to, pal?" the driver asked, his eyes on me in the rearview mirror. I hesitated. "Just drive," I said, feeling like a cliché. "Head downtown." As the taxi pulled into traffic, I started to rationalize. It was just a final, pathetic jab. A way for her to feel like she had the last word, to reframe my leaving as some sort of game she was controlling. That was so Lucinda. Everything had to be a narrative she was writing. She couldn't just be dumped, she had to be the one magnanimously letting me go, a queen granting a temporary reprieve to a court jester. Yeah, that was it, a pathetic theatrical flourish. I almost laughed, the city lights smeared past the window. I tried to focus on the feeling of the worn vinyl seat beneath me, the driver's quiet humming along to the radio, anything to ground myself in this new, Lucy-free reality. But my mind kept drifting back, snagging on the rough edges of our time together. I remembered the little things, the things I'd once found endearing and now seemed off. Like the time I lost my grandfather's watch. I'd torn my apartment apart for 3 days, convinced it was gone forever. I mentioned it to her in passing, and she just closed her eyes for a moment, tilted her head, and said, "Did you check inside the lining of your old winter coat?" The one in the back of the closet. I had, of course. And there it was, nestled in a tear in the silk lining I never knew existed. I'd called it an amazing guess. She just smiled and said, "I just followed the feeling." Or the way she'd always finish my sentences, not in the cute, couple-y way, but with an unnerving precision, sometimes with thoughts I hadn't even fully formed myself. She'd claimed we were tuned into each other, I'd called it paying attention. And her theories, God, the theories, about how people leave energetic trails, like snails leaving slime, and how if you're sensitive enough, you can follow them anywhere. How certain objects hold onto a person's essence. I dismissed it all as new age nonsense, the kind of stuff you read on wellness blogs. But now, sitting in the back of this taxi, a cold knot was tightening in my stomach. What if it wasn't just talk? What if she actually believed it? What if, and this was the thought that made my breath catch, what if she was right? An hour ticked by. The initial wave of relief had evaporated, leaving behind a sticky residue of anxiety. The driver had dropped me off at my request near a part of the city I rarely visited, a neutral zone with no shared memories, no ghosts of dates past. I was walking now, just walking aimlessly, trying to put physical miles between me and her apartment, as if sheer distance could sever the invisible thread she'd spun around my life. My rationality, my logical, sensible brain that had gotten me through 2 years of her eccentricities, was starting to fray at the edges. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the emotional drain of the breakup was short-circuiting my reason, making me see patterns in the static. But the world seemed to be actively conspiring against my peace of mind. I ducked into a 24-hour convenience store, the kind of place that feels unstuck in time, to buy a bottle of water. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with an irritating, relentless hum. The kid behind the counter was a zombie, propped up at the counter, his face illuminated by the blue light of his phone. A tinny radio, crackling with static, played softly beside the register. And then I heard it, the song. It wasn't just any song. It was an obscure indie track from a decade ago, a one-hit wonder from a band that had imploded as quickly as they'd appeared. It was the song we'd heard on our third date in some grimy dive bar. Lucinda, in her typical fashion, had latched onto it, declaring it our song with a finality that allowed for no debate. I hadn't heard it in years. Hearing it now in this random, soulless convenience store in the middle of a Tuesday night felt like a deliberate, targeted attack. My hand trembled as I fumbled with my cash. The kid didn't even look up, lost in his digital world. I fled back onto the street, the bottle of water cold and slick in my sweaty palm. The city felt different now, hostile. The anonymous faces in the late-night crowds no longer seemed benign. Every casual glance in my direction felt loaded with intent. I saw a man leaning against a lamppost, talking on his phone, and I was utterly convinced he was describing me. Yeah, a gray jacket, looked scared. Heading south on 4th. A woman walking her dog paused under a streetlight and looked straight at me, her expression unreadable, and my heart leaped into my throat with a painful jolt. Then I saw the bag and my blood ran cold. She was across the street waiting for the light to change, a perfectly ordinary woman. But she was carrying a canvas tote bag, and hanging from its strap, twisting gently in the breeze from the subway grate, was a small, crudely woven doll. It was made of dark, coarse yarn with mismatched button eyes and straw-like hair sticking out at odd angles. It was identical, not similar, identical, to the one Lucinda had made for me a year ago. A protection totem, she'd called it, to ward off negative energies. I'd thought it was creepy and ugly and had promptly buried it in the back of my sock drawer. Seeing its twin out here in the wild was statistically impossible. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was a signal, a marker, a signpost on the trail she was following. I spun around and ducked into a dark, narrow alleyway, the stench of stale garbage and urine hitting me like a physical blow. I pressed my back against the rough, cold brick, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. This wasn't a game, this wasn't a dramatic metaphor. The city was no longer a sprawling, indifferent metropolis. It had become her board, and I was just a piece she was moving. The people weren't strangers, they were her eyes and ears. The coincidences weren't random, they were breadcrumbs she was leaving for me or perhaps for herself to follow. I felt a primal, hunted fear begin to bloom in my chest, cold and suffocating. The 2-hour head start wasn't a gift, it was a countdown. And the clock was ticking louder and louder in my head. I found a 24-hour coffee shop that smelled of burnt espresso and desperation. It was one of those places with sticky tables and a clientele that looked like they had nowhere else to go. Perfect, I could blend in. I slid into a booth in the back corner, the vinyl cracked and cold against my skin, and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type my passcode. I needed an anchor. I needed a chorus of rational voices to tell me I was being an idiot, that my grief-stricken, sleep-deprived brain was playing tricks on me. I opened Reddit, my fingers flying across the screen, the words tumbling out in a chaotic, desperate stream. Title: My ex gave me a 2-hour head start. That was an hour and 58 minutes ago. I typed it all out. The breakup, the crying, the weird things she used to say, the apartment that felt like a shrine to some unknown god. And then the whisper in the elevator. I described the song on the radio, the woven doll on the stranger's bag. I wrote, "Am I going crazy? Tell me I'm going crazy. Tell me this is just a string of horrible, meaningless coincidences." I felt a small measure of relief just getting it out, externalizing the panic that was eating me alive. My post was a mess of typos and frantic energy. Before hitting post, I instinctively swiped down to check the time. It was 1:37 a.m. The head start was dwindling. And as I went to close the notification screen, my thumb hovering over the home button, I saw it. A tiny red bubble on my phone app icon, 4 missed calls. My blood turned to ice. I never get calls this late. I tapped it open. Unknown number 12:15 a.m. Unknown number 12:30 a.m. Unknown number 12:45 a.m. Unknown number 1 a.m. A cold, methodical pattern, every 15 minutes like clockwork. My phone had been on silent the entire time, a habit I'd gotten into because Lucinda used to call me incessantly. I hadn't heard a thing. I stared at the log, my mind racing to connect the dots. The last call was at 1 o'clock, 37 minutes ago. Then a new thought, sharp and terrifying, cut through the fog. I looked at the coffee shop's grimy front window, then back at my phone. I'd walked in here around 1:35 a.m. My fingers, now numb and clumsy, flew back to the Reddit post. I added a frantic update at the bottom. Edit, holy shit, I just checked my phone. I've had missed calls from an unknown number every 15 minutes for the last hour and a half. My phone was on silent, I didn't know. The last one was at 1 a.m. I just got here. Oh god, I think she knows where I am. I think she's been tracking me this whole time. I hit post. The spinning wheel felt like it was mocking me. The fear was no longer a suspicion. It was a certainty. It was in my pocket. It had been with me the whole time. The moment the post went live, all pretense of rationality shattered. The coffee shop, once a refuge, now felt like a glass cage. The other patrons, the tired-looking woman nursing a cold cup, the student hunched over a laptop, were they just people? Or were they watching? The barista wiping down the counter, did he glance at me for a second too long? My brain was a feedback loop of pure, unadulterated panic. The missed calls were the proof. It wasn't just a song or a doll anymore. This was data. This was a direct, technological intrusion. How could she possibly know my number if it was blocked? How could she be calling from an unknown number with such terrifying regularity? The questions swirled but offered no comfort, only deeper fear. The 2-hour mark was no longer an abstract threat. It was a deadline hurtling toward me. I threw a $10 bill on the table, not even waiting for the coffee I'd ordered, and bolted out the door. The night air, which had earlier felt like freedom, now felt thin and menacing. I needed to hide, not just walk, not just blend in, but disappear. My mind frantically scanned the street. Not my apartment, she'd go there first. Not a friend's place, she knew all of them. I needed somewhere anonymous, somewhere temporary, somewhere that didn't require a credit card or an ID. A flickering neon sign down a side street caught my eye, Oasis Motel Vacancy. It was perfect in its imperfection. The sign had a few dead letters, giving it a desperate, forgotten look. It was the kind of place people go when they don't want to be found. I ran, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the quiet street. I paid in cash, a wad of crumpled bills I pulled from my back pocket. The night clerk was a skeletal man with weary eyes who barely looked at me. He slid a tarnished brass key across the counter, room 107. The room was even grimmer than I'd imagined. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. A single bare bulb cast long, distorted shadows across the stained brown carpet. The window looked out onto a brick wall. Perfect. I locked the door, slid the chain across, and then, for good measure, dragged the heavy particle board desk in front of it. The scraping sound was loud and final. My sanctuary was a tiny, windowless bathroom. I locked that door too and slid down to the floor, my back against the cold porcelain of the tub. I was shaking uncontrollably. I pulled out my phone, the screen a malevolent glowing rectangle in the darkness. 1:43 a.m., 17 minutes left. I sat there in the dark, listening to the frantic drumming of my own heart. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren, every flush of a toilet in another room was her. It was her coming for me. Her words echoed in my head, no longer a whisper but a roar. I keep you safe. I'm the only one who knows how. Was this it? Was this her idea of safety? A world so terrifying that I would have no choice but to run back to her. The hunter, creating the fear that would drive the prey back into her arms. I stared at the numbers on my phone, watching the minutes bleed away, each second a tiny, agonizing eternity. The final minutes were the worst. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each second drawn out into a thin, vibrating wire of pure dread. I sat in that grimy bathtub, my knees pulled up to my chest, staring at the glowing numbers on my phone. 1:58, 1:59. My entire world had shrunk to this tiny, ticking clock in my hand. I held my breath, bracing for the inevitable, the splintering crash of the door. Her voice calling my name from the other room, a hand on the bathroom doorknob. My imagination, fueled by adrenaline and 2 hours of relentless psychological torment, painted a dozen different scenarios, each more horrific than the last. Then the time on the phone clicked over, 2 a.m., and then nothing, absolute, profound silence. The only sound was the frantic, thumping pulse in my own ears. I waited. The silence was heavier, more terrifying than any noise could have been. It was a vacuum, a void where the climax of my fear was supposed to be. 1 minute passed, 2:01, still nothing. 5 minutes 2:05, the building groaned, but the sound was distant, impersonal. 10 minutes 2:10. A strange, hysterical feeling started to bubble up inside me, laughter. It was a choked, broken sound that escaped my lips without permission. I was a fool, a complete and utter idiot. I had spent 2 hours tearing through the city like a terrified animal, hiding in a filthy motel bathroom, all because of a single melodramatic sentence from a woman I knew was an expert at mind games. She had won, she didn't need to find me, she had made me imprison myself. The relief was so immense, so overwhelming, it felt like a physical weight lifting off my chest. I was exhausted, humiliated, but I was free. I shakily got to my feet, my legs stiff and weak. I was just about to reach for the bathroom light switch to finally step out of the darkness when my phone screen lit up, casting a pale, ghostly light on the tiled walls. It was a text message from an unknown number. My heart stopped. With a trembling finger, I opened it. It contained only 8 words. The game of hide-and-seek is over. Now it's my turn to hide. Update, it's been a few days. I'm okay. Well, alive is probably a better word. Thank you to everyone who commented, who sent messages, who told me to call the police. I didn't. What would I have said? That my ex-girlfriend sent me a spooky text? They'd have laughed me out of the station. I don't know if that final text was from her or if it was just some sick troll who read my post and decided to pour gasoline on the fire. It doesn't matter anymore. The effect is the same. She won. Not by finding me, but by making it so I can never be sure she isn't about to. She planted a seed of fear in my head, and now it's a full-blown forest. I left that motel. I'm in a different city now, a different state, but every time my phone buzzes, I flinch. Every time I see a stranger with a canvas bag, my stomach plummets. She doesn't need to follow my energy trail. She's inside my head now, a permanent, terrifying ghost in my own machine. The 2-hour head start never ended, it just became my life.